Hey everyone, it's Sean again, and in this video we're going to be talking about a section in chapter 5 called, section 5 in chapter 5 called the ego uses of guilt. And this section is really, really powerful because it gets into the ego and how the ego uses guilt against us, to keep us believing that we're separate from God, from our source. And so I'm going to be talking, I'm probably going to do a few videos just on this one section because there's so many good parts of it that I think I'm going to try to keep these videos short so I can really get into them more. But so I'm probably going to do a few videos on this. So, and it starts out by saying the ego's purpose is fear, and only the fearful are egotistic. And that's true if you think about the people we tend to think in this world that people we call egotistical. That if you really look at them, we all know that the reason that way is because they are fearful, and they are scared that people will see them the way they see themselves, and so they try to project this confidence. They overcompensate by doing that. But underneath that, it's because they're fearful. They have a lot of fear, and they don't want people to see that they are terrified. And so, but that word egotistic doesn't just apply to that either. It applies to anyone, all of us, because we're in a state of fear. If someone is cowering in fear and hiding away because they're in fear, that's egotistic also, because they believe they are guilty. Underneath all that, and we're going to talk about that and why that is. So remember this statement: guilt demands punishment. And we're going to be talking about it. I'm going to be talking about this a lot in other videos too, and keep mentioning that, because when you really understand the meaning of that, you recognize that, it's that guilt, that unconscious guilt, that deep-seated unconscious guilt in our mind that is behind all of our situations and circumstances that causes any kind of fear, worry, anxiety, pain, suffering, all of it. All the horrible things that happen to us and the horrible things we do is because of that guilt. And that guilt is unconscious because we don't want to look at it. And so we bury it deep in our minds, and then we project it out onto the world. And so remember that. Guilt demands punishment. And just to give you an idea that, how this world is an outside picture of an inward condition and how we're perceiving the world. And so let's look at the world. When someone is found guilty in a court of law, what do? We punish them. If your child disobeys you, what do? We punish them. Or if in your job you do something you're not supposed to do, what happens? You get punished, and on and on and on. There's all these ways that we punish other people, and it's all based on guilt. So we're going to be talking about that a lot in just these couple videos here. We're going to do it in the ego, how the ego uses that guilt. So I'm going to talk about a couple lines here. First, guilt is always disruptive. Anything that engenders fear is divisive because it obeys the law of division. And so you think about that, the law of division. We're always talking about these laws of the world or laws of God. But we never talk about the law of division. That's the ego law, that the ego just divides and subdivides, because separation is how would I say that it is the cause of its being, so to speak. That it has us believing that we're separate from our source. And that's why the ego's thought system is based upon separation. Without that, our belief in that separation, there would be no ego. And so it's a law of division, because the way the ego just is always having us dividing and subdividing. Everything, we can look at time. Every little increment of time is another symbol of division, of separation. So there's all kinds of symbols of this world. Everything that appears to be separate from us is just another symbol of that separation. And so if the ego is the symbol of separation, it is also the symbol of guilt. Guilt is more than merely not of God. It is a symbol of attack on God. That's something we don't want to think about, is, well, why is it that we're attacking God? How could we even attack God? But that's what guilt does. It's the belief that we are somehow has separated ourselves from our source, from God. And because of that separation, thinking that the holy, the perfect, can be separate, can be not holy, the innocent can be guilty, the perfect can be not perfect. That is an attack upon God. We're saying that no, there can be something other than God. So in reality, it really is an attack upon God. We're saying there's, that we can do something you can't do, God. It's kind of like, listen, there you go, and what do? We made up a world of separation, a universe of separation, and a body that can die. Look what I can do, God. I can create death. And so it is an attack upon God. It's like an attack upon the holy, even though it's not true. And it's insane. It's totally insane. Why would we do this? Because that's what guilt does. The ego's purpose is fear, and that fear comes from guilt. Why? Because guilt demands punishment. The ego is the part of the mind that believes in division. How could part of God detach itself without believing it is attacking Him? So, and that's again about how we think that's really is a belief that we are attacking God by doing that, because we usurp God's power by doing this, by thinking we could go off on our own, that we could separate from our source. It's kind of the ego's way of convincing us we usurp God's power. Therefore, we are, it's like an attack on God, thinking we could even do that in the first place. And so if you identify with the ego, you must perceive yourself as guilty. Whenever you respond to your ego, you will experience guilt, and you will fear punishment. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. So every time we are fear, why would we need to fear something unless we fear punishment? And that's that underlying guilt there. That's deep-seated in our mind that we're here to heal. That Jesus in A Course in Miracles is trying to get us to get back to the mind, to that source where that guilt is, so we can begin this process of healing it, this process of undoing the ego's thought system and uncovering that deep-seated guilt, so we can finally see that none of it's true. It's just a big lie. It's the big deception, and that we could possibly be guilty, that the perfectly innocent, as we were created, could be guilty. But that's what we think we did, and the ego thinks it is us. The ego thinks that's what we did, and the ego thinks it is us. So its only existence is in keeping that belief that we are separate alive in our mind, and keeping that guilt buried in our mind so we don't look at it. Because once we heal that and recognize that we aren't separate from our source, that it is impossible in truth, then there will be no longer be an ego. It will no longer have an existence, because we won't believe it anymore. We'll think, well, that's crazy. Why would I want to be separate from my source? That is everything, that has given me everything, that perfect security, that perfect peace, that perfect happiness, perfect joy. But this is what we believe, and that's following the ego's thought system and listening to its voice. It keeps that separation alive in our minds, so that we don't look at it. And then we project it out onto the world and onto people, situations, circumstances. And we believe the world is coming at us, and that it's a fearful world coming at us, when it's actually coming from us, because guilt demands punishment. We project it out onto the world, and then we have these experiences where things seem to happen to us that are like a form of punishment. There's something, there's all these, whether it be horrible things or things that are causing us any kind of worry, anxiety, fear. Those are just all different kinds of forms of it. But underneath all that guilt, that unconscious guilt, is what's driving us. We set ourselves up by listening to the ego. We set ourselves up for these situations where we literally are experiencing punishment. And look at all the victims of abuse. They, underneath all that, they fear, well, maybe, or they think that maybe I deserve this. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't love enough, and on and on. That's because they believe they deserved it. Because guilt demands punishment. And so, one more line here I'm going to talk about. Listening to the ego's voice means that you believe that it is possible to attack God and that a part of Him has been torn away by you. Fear of retaliation from without follows because the severity of the guilt is so acute that it must be projected. And so, again, that's why I was just talking about how we project our guilt onto the world, onto our relationships, and then we experience that guilt coming back to us in the form of all these circumstances and situations that are a form of punishment, because it's, because that guilt being in our mind, being so acute and so horrible to us that we think it's so horrible we don't want to look at it. We have to get rid of it. And the ego's way of getting rid of it is projecting onto the world and all these people, other people, peoples and situations, circumstances, whatever it calls for, thinking that we're getting rid of it. But that's actually designed to keep the guilt in place because we don't look at it. So we think by projecting it out, we're getting rid of it, when we're really, that's a way of just keeping it in place, and we just keep experiencing these things over and over and over. What we call patterns. We have these patterns in our lives where things that just keep happening to us, and that's coming from that guilt. So it's deep. I mean, I'm going to go into this more and more in some other videos just on this section too. So I don't want to make this too long, so to give you a chance to review it, and because there's a lot there to uncover and to see what's really going on with that, with the ego and what it's doing, how it uses guilt against us, so that we can begin this process of learning how to heal it through the amazing power of forgiveness. So we'll be talking about that more and more. So anyway, that's it for this video. So I hope that's helpful. And if it is, then feel free to share it if you know some people who might benefit from that. If you have any questions about it, comments, please leave it in the comment section. And I'll see you in the next video. So y'all have a great day and be good to each other, okay?